Welcome back to another Upbuild podcast. And I'm here with Hari Prasad and Vipin. And today we're going to be talking about the Enneagram and why the framework has become such a core part of our work and is the centerpiece of many of the workshops that we do and really informs our understanding of ourselves and the clients that we work with and the people in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm very inspired by this subject because I'm always asking the question, well, why? Why should we do anything? Why should we focus our attention on anything? There's always so much that competes for our attention. What do we really want to intentionally invest in? And with the Enneagram, it's taken on such a life of its own since we got started working with the framework personally when we were monks, as well as then, well, in the monastery, working with individuals from the community that was developing around the self-work we were sharing, as well as in organizations. And we've only seen that grow in momentum. And when we transitioned out of the monastery and made this our full-time calling, this work of Upbuild, the Enneagram has kind of reached a fever pitch, you could say, in terms of its resonance with people, as far as we've seen. So why? Yeah. Well, what I always think about is the work of Upbuild is all about the ego, recognizing that if we want to be our best self, we have to see what's getting in the way. And that is the ego, the identity of who we think we should be, as opposed to who we actually are. Deep down, we are someone who is being blocked by projections, ideas, who we think we're supposed to be and how we need to show up in the world. And what the Enneagram does is it gives us a very specific lens and a language to dissect the ego and see what exactly are the specific blocks. It is so personalized for every single individual on the planet. It's mind-blowing. So instead of seeing in broad strokes, the ego is getting in the way, now you're up against my ego. And it has these colors. It looks like this, and there are patterns that are recognizable. And I can understand why, which is extraordinary. You know, talking about the inspiration to understand the why. Well, why does my ego demand these things of me? Why am I so bent on getting validation for an idea of who I think I should be? There are specific pieces according to the different dimensions of the framework. Of course, the types are the most well-known, the 9 different personality types, but then there's so many incredible intricacies. And we like to talk about how it actually breaks down into 108 types. If you take each large piece of the framework and you line it up, we have 108 different personality structures, and each one is looking for something and is asking us to behave in a certain way. And if we don't know that that's what's going on, then we are at the mercy of our ego type. We have no choice. So the Enneagram gives us a freedom. By seeing what is playing on us, we have a choice. Do we want to just play into it? Or do we want to channel that energy differently in a constructive way that is really thought through and can provide the greatest benefit to myself and to others? So that, for me, is the power of this framework, the freedom that comes from recognizing why I'm showing up the way I am. What is it about me that demands I act in this way and constitutes all of these patterns, and how it's so specific and personalized, tailored just for me. I mean, I share that when I first came in touch with my Enneagram type, the most gross piece of the framework, just seeing my type alone, one of the 9 types, I broke down in tears because I couldn't believe a stranger had written all about my life. it was so shocking. And I wanted to put it away, but I couldn't, because I knew that if I want to be sincere, there's stuff here for me to learn. And it has been an incredible journey.
I love that opening. Actually, it's so powerful to connect it, um, so much to the ego, and that is the core of our work. I think a couple other things that strike me here are, in general, people talk about how behavioral change is so difficult, right? Some people go to the extreme that it's impossible. You can't really change someone's behavior. A lot of people try, but that's difficult. And when I think about the Enneagram, it's very difficult to change someone's behavior if you don't change one's behavior if you don't actually understand what's driving the behavior. And most often that's opaque to most of us. And what the Enneagram does is its entire focus is what is underlying the behavior. What are the motivations and insecurities that are causing me to show up in a certain way? And so most personality frameworks out there focus on the level of categorizing our behavior. And so, yes, we can put ourselves in a category, but it then becomes difficult to know, how do I transcend that? And with the Enneagram, understanding what is underlying the behavior is so powerful, because then it can actually lead to change and transformation once I have a really concrete, specific sense of what's driving those behaviors. The other thing that's related to this is the levels of consciousness framework. So the levels of consciousness represent a vertical dimension of the Enneagram. It's by consciousness, we mean awareness or health, and how aware are we of the things that we're doing and why we're doing those things. And so what all of a sudden what happens is it moves from a flat structure and a framework to a three-dimensional one. And again, most personality typologies are flat. They're two-dimensional. It's a categorization. But this vertical dimension that creates a box, a 3D box, where there's movement, we can find ourselves moving up and down based on how much awareness and health we're bringing to our lives. That creates a dynamism that is reflective of reality in a way that is so profound. It's so powerful and allows us to see, how do I become a better version of myself? There is a path here because there's movement that's possible, and I can see what my personality type looks like at lower levels of awareness and at higher levels of awareness. So again, it gives you a path to that transformation. If you understand what's driving the behavior, and you can see, you have visibility into what that same personality looks like at greater levels of consciousness, there's a path to transformation it's like you're shown the road and then you have to take the steps, but usually we don't even see the path. So
that's also the beauty.
And the language piece of this is so important, that it gives us a language to actually call out our insecurities. I think one of the things I experienced in the transition of not knowing the framework and then having knowledge of the framework was not that my insecurities became easier to deal with. They've always been very difficult to deal with, but I think before the framework, I felt insecure about talking about my insecurities. And then all of a sudden, there was a little bit more security around talking about my insecurities. One, because other people of the same type also have these insecurities. And so we aren't alone in having these insecurities. And then second of all, the exact language to use is so helpful because it gives us a structure with which to understand where we will be and what it will look like when we're healthy and when we're aware, and vice versa when we're not healthy and when we're aware. And so just by bringing that language into the present moment or into a relationship, into a conversation, we get a clearer picture of where we're functioning, and then also what the path what the path forward might be, as you just spoke about, Vipin.
And also, nobody gets off the hook from insecurity. And the Enneagram captures that beautifully and codifies it, where you really feel like I'm not alone. No matter what, I'm not alone, and I'm not crazy. There are reasons that I'm operating this way. There are reasons that I feel insecure, and I'm acting on that insecurity. And it sort of normalizes and creates safety, which is so, so precious. And when we bring that out in the work that we do, the whole landscape changes. It's just this palpable shift in energy. And suddenly it's like, oh, I can be myself. Wow, I can be received. Many people that we work with find like they've never had that experience before. It sounds crazy, but it's true. And what to speak of in the workplace, or even at home, when we have couples and families do this work, it's incredible. So also, speaking about the workplace, Vipin, you were talking about the motivations versus the behaviors. And everybody's obsessed with, how do I motivate people in the workplace? How do I motivate people? How do I motivate people? And leadership means I've got to be able to motivate people. It's true. But if you want to be able to motivate people, how can you ignore their motivations? And how can you whitewash it and think they're all the same? So here we get an incredible lens, an insight into the inner workings of people to see what actually motivates them. And now that can be manipulated. This has to be done for the sake of service. Any powerful knowledge requires great responsibility. It can be misused. But that's why we spend so much time talking about the mood and the purpose. Why, and how do we want to wield this in the most effective way? And that also comes back to levels of consciousness, which for us is the key. That's the pillar of all of this. It's really the purpose, is to climb up the levels of consciousness where I can be who I am without trying to prove something about, what I think I should be. Not being locked in the ego, but actually being free to see, what does it mean to just be myself right now and to really serve other people? And also great credit to our teachers, Don Riso and Russ Hudson at the Enneagram Institute, because not all work with the Enneagram revolves around levels of consciousness. The vast majority of it doesn't even acknowledge levels of consciousness, what to speak of revolve around it. So that they've made an incredible contribution themselves. So many, the list goes on and on, but this piece is so pivotal. It's all about what level of consciousness am I functioning at, even more than what is my type.
There's an interesting, there's the excitement that you spoke about. Well, I love when the excitement comes with a sense of disgust, that when I feel simultaneously really inspired and just like, I think there's no better word than excitement. And also at the exact same time, disgusted by my behaviors and the impact of my behaviors on other people. And then to think back, this is not something that's just happened in the last couple of days. This is a pattern that's repeated itself for our whole lives. And to be able to hold those two things next to each other and true simultaneously is, first of all, feels really real and also really useful, because the excitement gives us motivation to keep doing the work, and the disgust gives us a motivation to change.
Yes. And it's so helpful to have that leverage of disgust with my own actions, because otherwise it's like I can just, yeah, it's not that bad. Like, come on, everybody's human. But if we really want to grow, it means we need that leverage. No, this must change. I must take responsibility. I cannot stand being not myself anymore. I cannot stand being not myself anymore. That has to really come from within. And when that happens, that's where we see people soar in consciousness. People make a huge impact. So we have to have that sense of like, no, I will not continue with the habitual self-image and the habitual patterns that conform to this self-image. There's so much to be achieved in terms of being really what satisfies the true self, offering that to the world.
I was thinking about the session that we had with Satchidananda Swami a couple of weeks or last week, where he talked about be an original. You were born an original, and be an original, not some photocopy of someone else. And there are two parts of this that, as you were speaking, Hari, I was thinking about. One is, well, often, you know, we like we talk about you were talking about leadership earlier, and the fact that we think leaders are a certain way, and so we sort of just push down our own personalities so that we can become like what we think those leaders ought to look like. It's another version of you know, I'm trying to be who I think I should be versus who I actually am. And then on the other side, it's interesting to think of what does it look like to be an original in the context of a personality typology, where even if not one of 9 types or one of 18 types in wings, one of 108 different combinations, what does that look like to be an original in that context?
Well, to be an original means I have to be in touch with what it is that I value. And that brings us into what are called the essence qualities. So each type comes with essence qualities that are like the properties of the true self. And they are distinct from the other types. So that's a good starting point, is figuring out, what do I really value? What are the qualities that I'm trying to refract, you know, through this idea of I am not enough of them, so I need to bring them out. And that's really where the ego comes in, is this idea that I'm not enough of these wonderful things. For example, you know, I glory, value, and hope, that I really want to bring to the world hope and set an example that the sky's the limit for what can be accomplished and what can be offered to others. And, you know, I love the feeling of being an instrument in that offering, being the person who's able to bring that out to others, and finding my value in that. That's what I was meant for. That's my purpose. So the type 3, the achiever, has those essence qualities. And what ends up happening is, you know, I'm afraid, the fear comes, the basic fear. Each type has a core fear that's running them. And the basic fear is that I'm not enough of my essence qualities for all the types. So I don't have enough value. I'm not glorious. I don't offer everybody hope through everything that I do. So then, well, I need to become that. And then that's where I stiffen and I start to look at, well, what did other people do? How did they, you know, what did they do that was valued by the world? And I'm afraid, I'm terrified of being worthless, that I won't be enough. So I put it on, you know, And that's when I start to just look like other people in this world, when I start to conform to society's expectations. And we all do that. All the types do that. Threes sort of typify that, because they're so attuned to what other people want, what's valuable, that they're the poster children for this. But all the types are doing this. We all do that. And what it comes down to is actually trusting that I have these essence qualities within me. And let me not try to prove that to myself or to anybody else. Let me not try to, accomplish them, but let me really be as I am and do what I love in a way that is considerate of other people and considerate of my own insecurities. And what we find is actually, when you're just aware of your insecurities and you don't play into them, you start to become unique. You start to become original, because it's our insecurities that make us blend in and conform and try to become something that we're not. But if I just see these insecurities and I say, oh, I don't have to actually act on that. I trust that I have intrinsic worth, and I can talk to people when I'm feeling insecure. I can be honest. I can open up. This concept of Sangha, that is, the driving force behind what we do in creating community and in advancing on our own path. Sangha means the company that you keep. It's the connections with others. That is what lifts our consciousness. There's nothing more effective in raising consciousness than being with people of a high consciousness who are sincere and serious. So when I can open up to them and learn from them and ironically emulate them, I become myself. I become unique, because I'm taking notes on what is real and applying that to myself rather than trying to imitate and trying to do things out of a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. I feel freer.
I love what you shared just now about how we're actually not unique when we are acting from our fixations, but when we're not, that's when we're actually free. Yeah, so powerful.
The two things that I think about with this framework in terms of what is so powerful when you really grasp it, there are sort of two directions of usefulness. On the negative end, when we touched upon this, seeing my insecurities and owning them. When I act on them, I apologize, I recognize, I take responsibility, I allow it to humble me, which actually brings me more in touch with the positive of the real self. When I'm humbled, I'm getting closer to who I am. When I'm puffed up, I'm further from who I am. I'm expanding outwardly instead of going deeper inwardly. And so the negative side, seeing the insecurities and the qualities that are not becoming of me, and deciding not to play into them, and dare I say, being prayerful, recognizing at a certain point that I may not be able to uproot them on my own. And this is where we talked about in the spiritual dimensions, the Enneagram, really dependence on a higher power is an extraordinary thing. And Don Riso and Russ Hudson teach this as quite essential. When we work with organizations, that's not something that we will speak about generally, although sometimes it comes up with particular groups. But when we get to a certain point, that becomes really, really essential, that I have tried to not play into my insecurities. I've tried as hard as I can, and I still have them. And I start to feel, please, please uproot these. I can't do it on my own. And again, we seek the Sangha, or the company of people who exemplify that and who can help us through. And then on the positive side is seeing my gifts, seeing the ways in which my nature is meant for service of humanity, service of all living beings. And And when I get a handle on what it is that makes me me and what are the unique gifts, then I can engage them accordingly and stop trying to, fit the round peg in the square hole. I can actually be comfortable in my own skin. I don't have to try to become a 3 because, the top leaders are 3s. I don't have to become an 8 because the 8s are hardcore, man. And, that's what's demanded of, somebody who really wants to make it in the world. I don't have to become something that I'm not. I can engage my nature in the service of everybody. And that is so uplifting and just beautifully freeing. So the negative of insecurities and, guarding our hearts from them and cultivating a sacred space of not letting them get in the way of our hearts, and then also engaging our gifts and seeing what is it that makes us thrive, what is it that makes us come alive, and using that for the benefit of everyone.
We can also, the Enneagram is not just about understanding us, but it's about understanding others, as we spoke about earlier with motivation. And so if we think about the negative and the positive that you just shared, Hari, to be able to see other people's challenges and understand that if they're not my type, they might be very different than the challenges that I'm facing. And being able to relate to those challenges and feel compassion and empathy for those challenges, and therefore treat them differently than I may have before if I didn't have the understanding of what they were going through. And then also on the positive side, when we are able to see other people's gifts as actual gifts and not see other people as less good versions of us. And I'm speaking from personal pre-Enneagram experience, but really see them as gifts. There was one thing that Vipin, you had shared during one of our workshops about a type 9, the peace seeker, who had been somebody who you knew who had been a CEO, and how type 9s usually don't find themselves in CEO type roles, but how even if she couldn't necessarily see it herself, it's likely a huge breath of fresh air for the people around her, because 9s tend to be so much more consensus driven and have a real knack for bringing in all the points of views that are in the room and making sure that everyone else understands all the points of views in the room before actually moving ahead with the decision, as opposed to the classic go-getter type CEOs who are usually more top down and heavy-handed in their decision making. And so really appreciating that somebody else might be able to provide those type of gifts in that sort of way, in a very different way than I can provide them.
Couldn't emphasize enough that empathy piece. That is what creates a safe space and a sacred environment, and an environment of inspiration, both in individual connections with people and in teams and systems. That is a culture that we would do anything to propagate as large scale as we could, because it just gives oxygen where we're all feeling like we need to fit in and perform. And I mean, this is even in personal relationships, that we can't be free to express ourselves or to go into what is really affecting us, what is really in our heart. Oftentimes we don't even look at it. And when there's the invitation to look at it, to express it, and to be heard and felt, there's no greater service. I mean, there's even studies that show the greatest human need is that empathy. It's the most healing thing. I really appreciate that. I wanted to also ask of you, oh, please.
No, please.
I just wanted to ask of you, I had one final question. What has the Enneagram done for you personally, and what have you seen of its effects on others?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was wanting to share something.
Oh, great.
And I had an intuition that that's what you were going to ask. So I thought it better come from a question than me just sharing independent of that. But I was going to say, when I think about why the Enneagram, for me, if I step all the way back and I think, you know, what has given me more insight about myself than the Enneagram? There's been nothing that has come close. And I came across the Enneagram through you guys in 2013. So I was in my late 30s at the time, and I felt like I kind of felt like I knew myself pretty well. The thing we talk about, I'm pretty self-aware. And so then I come across the Enneagram and I think, oh my gosh, the story that I have told myself and explained all of my choices and decisions for 37, 38 years of my life. There's another truer story, and probably a truer story underneath that, and one underneath that that's more revealing and more accurate. And how have I been operating without this clarity, with this false narrative? And I think, to what Michael was saying earlier, the experience I had in that workshop was, first, everybody has their own fears and insecurities that they're operating from. So as a baseline, made it okay to be like, okay, I have these things, a lot of which I would have felt were fatal flaws in myself, or that I would have tried to brush under the rug. And then to say, okay, it's okay. First of all, I can acknowledge that we all have insecurities, and I have them too. And then, as Michael said, the specific flavor of the ones that I had that felt particularly dark. And, you know, as a 3, I can talk about specifically the ways in which I might compete with my brother that I would have not wanted to ever expose to anyone else. It was like something that I sort of contemplated in my own private time. But then to be able to get up on the panel of 3s and things that I had never shared with anyone, you know, that I felt comfortable putting out there. And it was, as Hari, you mentioned, a breath of fresh air. It was like a release. Like, I can acknowledge that this is there. I can accept myself, instead of detesting myself for having these things or trying to hide from it. And then there's a release, that grip it holds on me, and instead of reacting to that feeling of like, oh, I got to be better than I have to be superior to everybody else in order to feel like I'm good enough. And I noticed it doesn't mean that feeling doesn't go away. So this morning in self, I don't remember exactly, I was coming out of the shower and I had this flash of a thought that relates to my need for being seen as the best, the golden child, the golden boy. And I could be like, oh, there it is. There you are. Hello. And it's usually, I think what would have happened 10 years ago, it would have started, I don't know what my reaction to that thought would have been, but I'd start to act on, okay, what do I need to do to puff myself up, to feel like I am deserving of, I am enough, I am who I think I should be. And now the transformation is in seeing those pinches when they come, and then being able to recognize them. Not always, not sometimes I do react to those things, but more often than before, I can see what's happening. And then actually, if I can just name it, it goes away much faster. It's not even, I don't even need to tolerate the feeling of discomfort. It's like, oh, that phrase, there I go again, will then soon, we say everything passes with time, that too shall pass, but it passes a lot faster when I have that experience of there I go again. It's like, okay, let's just leave that there. So that to me has been transformative. And when I think about this, other people in my life or people that we work with in coaching context, I mean, it's crazy to see the transformation that we experience. And it goes to say this idea that people can't change themselves. It feels like when you've seen it over and over again, when people get to a deeper understanding of what is causing them to operate a certain way, to me, it changed. My whole world opened up. And all of a sudden, like my entire life story came into a relief in a way that I had not seen before. And then you can't choose to do the same things anymore once when you have more awareness of how you've been operating. And I think the same thing happens in, when we're working with other people in our workshops and our clients. Have seen that over and over again. You can't keep doing the same thing when you see the reality. So that's been my experience.
So inspiring. Thank you. Yeah, Michael?
For me, it's been seeing my own neediness and having a language to talk about that neediness, because it's always been there. And I appreciate your point, Vipin, about it going away in the short term when you're able to call it out. And I feel like through the Enneagram, I've gotten a larger lesson that I'm going to have to tolerate this discomfort from the neediness for like a long time. And I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive at all. But that like real hard, uncomfortable, crappy feeling toleration is going to be required. And that's just the path. There's sort of no other option.
Yeah. I think, and also just on short term versus long term, I think of different choices that I have been able to make with this understanding that are more longer term choices. So there's the short term, both sort of it falling off or tolerating the discomfort. But then in the longer term, some big choices, even what I want to do with my life, my career, that felt difficult to do because of the needs of my ego. That when you see a different story, it's like, well, how it allows one to choose something different. And that is, to me, long term, massive effect and change. Like, what are we doing here right now? I mean, well, how did we find ourselves here? And I think that the Enneagram was pivotal. And it's not that, the Enneagram was so attractive that what we wanted to do is just teach the Enneagram. And that is a piece of what the Enneagram allowed, is the vision to see, our true nature, and how can we choose something that's more aligned with that and dramatically different than what we have been doing in the past. And part of that is teaching the Enneagram, but it goes way beyond that, and helping people realize their true selves and helping ourselves do that as well in the process.
Fantastic. Excellent. Any final thoughts before we close?
I really feel like we've been given a gift, actually, when I think about coming across this. And it's mystical to think about who and how this knowledge and wisdom have come together in this way. But it's been a real gift in my life, in our lives, I think, and in the people that we've been able to share it with. So I'm really grateful that we've gotten to learn this and we've gotten to talk about it, and I can't wait to share it with more people.
Amazing. Right there with you. Thank
I
you for your hearts.
I can't even I'm trying to go through my catalog of people that I know, and I don't think there's anyone that I have a major relationship with that doesn't frequently talk to me about the Enneagram.
That's also amazing. Yeah. What a spirit. It's so good to also take stock of this for ourselves, you know, to really see and take a moment to honor what affects us and what is really benefiting us and serving others. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.